It seems like a lot of people are finally catching on to the idea that copying is a good thing. Well, maybe not that specifically, but the idea that recreating work from movies from other filmmakers to help refine and practice our own cinematography skills is something we should all be doing. In case you missed it, I did a video breaking down this whole approach and mindset and how it's absolutely one of the best ways to advance your skills as a filmmaker. I took some frames from one of my favorite movies, The Lobster, and practiced recreating those compositions. No focus on lighting or any real technicalities, just getting that framing and camera positioning right. So in today's video, I want to walk you guys through recreating some frames and some lighting from another one of my favorite films, but this time around, make it a little bit more interesting. We're gonna be shooting on the Sony ZV-E10. I think a lot of people get hung up on the idea that if you want to be a good cinematographer, you need a cinema camera, or you need one of the high-end mirrorless cameras. Enter this little guy. No 10-bit color, no fancy G-Master or cinema lenses, just a couple of good lights and some crafty set decoration courtesy of my wife. This time around, I want to share with you guys another one of my all-time favorite movies, It Follows, directed by David Robert Mitchell. If you're a horror or thriller fan, I personally think this is one of the most unique and original story horror concepts out there. Beyond that, it's just shot beautifully, of course, by DP Michael Gilakis. He has shot some amazing movies from Jordan Peele's Us, multiple films with M. Night Shyamalan, Servant on Apple TV. If you guys haven't seen that, incredible, one of my favorite series. He leans heavy into an emphasis on contrast, playing really deep into the shadows with a lot of motivated interior practical lighting. It really perfectly straddles that line of stylized yet nostalgic and organic light levels and colors. He also introduces such unique perspectives and camera movement that you just really don't see in a genre like this. He does things like these super long pans, just the camera sort of scanning, that force you to look deep into the frame and anticipate what's coming, look for the bad thing that's gonna happen. Or these really unique kind of POV shots from the characters that really ground you in their mindset in that moment. The set decoration, of course, really ties all of this together. It's got that nice textury detail from like the late 90s to early 2000s. It's super nostalgic, you know, me being born in the 90s. I don't know, I could go on and on about just how beautiful this film is. Go watch it. But let's jump in with a few of my favorite frames and see what we can come up with. So of course, a few things you're gonna need before you get started. We're using the ZV-E10. This is a pretty unique camera, being that it is currently Sony's cheapest mirrorless camera on the market. I think the body comes in at about $650. I'm using a couple of very inexpensive Rokinon prime lenses. I also have the kit lens, which we might actually end up needing. This is a 35mm 1.8. We also have the 24mm 2.8. These things are like a couple $100. Altogether, this package used, I'm sure you could probably find this for like under $700. It's got an APS-C sensor and we can do up to 4K 30 frames per second. Unfortunately, we're restricted to 8-bit color. I personally, on these older 8-bit Sony cameras, like using the HLG3 profile. I think this gives a very nice amount of dynamic range and room in post. For 24 frames, we get 100 megabits per second, which is not the greatest, but I still think you can do a lot with this thing. So I want to challenge myself a little bit and use a budget-friendly camera to recreate some of these frames, really show you guys that you can get out and do this even if you don't have a great camera. All right, so for our first scene, I want to take a look at the sequence of Jay, the main character, walking into the kitchen. She heard something, a window break, so she's going to investigate. We get this beautiful slow-mo shot of her walking into the frame just past this blue wall. She slowly turns to reveal, well, not gonna spoil it for you guys, go watch the movie, but let's just pull that back and look at this frame of her over here on the right third. I love the way this whole shot, this whole sequence feels, right? Like the whole house is pretty dark, but clearly there's this single kind of just overhead kitchen light on. It's very dramatic. I feel like growing up, I remember houses being like this. Like you hear noises at night, you have that creepy kind of dark interior lighting. I think this is pretty realistic for us to try, but right away, I realized we don't have any blue walls in our apartment, but I had this idea of creating a fake wall. So let's give this one a try. we have this pretty large floor mirror that I think if we just stood it up and propped it could easily be a wall. I used a C-stand and a clamp to hold the mirror upright. We had to actually prop it up on top of one of my Nanook cases to get it just a little bit higher to fill the frame. Then in order to get the blue wall, we just went to the hardware store and I was able to find some cheap stick-on temporary wallpaper that pretty well matched the color. We taped it in place with some gaff tape and created our fake blue wall. Now for this lighting setup, I figured that this is a soft but fairly small light source and it's coming from pretty high over her head. We can kind of get some clues as to how they lit this by looking at the shadows that are being cast on the object. So we see on the phone here, it's really directly below and just maybe slightly off to the left. We can also look at the shadow on her eyes, underneath her nose and jaw. And also we can actually see in the reflection on the phone that there is what looks to be a diffused light source of some sort. So for this, I chose to use the Nanlite Forza 60B with the spotlight and a small 5-in-1 reflector. Bouncing light off of surfaces tends to produce a little bit better quality of light, especially on skin and faces, than using something like a dome softbox. Using the spotlight, I'm able to precisely control the exact beam of the light so I can make it hit right on the reflector and kind of move it and shape it around so we can look at the shadows that are being cast on the subject's face and correct it accordingly. Kylie actually ended up taping in some little hair extensions on the front of her forehead to create bangs. I realized that the ambient light levels were too low after bringing in this negative fill. So what we did is actually turned on the overhead lights in our apartment to add a little bit of ambient warmth to the room. It's such a weird brain right? Like you think if a scene is really dark and there's like heavy shadows, you should just lower the intensity and output of all the lights. In order to achieve that contrast in that darkness, you still have to have light level in the shadows, but that just means that your key light has to be brighter. Normally you wouldn't want to do this because you don't want to have mismatched color temperatures with the ambient light and your key light source, but because the Forza 60B is bicolor, I can adjust that light source to match the overhead lights and we can use them to our advantage. This got us much closer now, and with just a few more small tweaks, like covering up this light back here that was shining on the cabinet, and after we stick a grate on this, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. There's a few small differences, but I think if you look at these two side by side, for one, with how good this image on the ZV-E 10 looks, but two, I didn't really think we'd be able to get the set design as close as we did. This was definitely an exciting start for our first shot. Okay, so we're on to the next shot, and I feel like this one should be one of the easier ones to go about doing. Famous last words. We have this medium close-up of Paul here, sat right up against this dresser. We use the one here in our bedroom. Pretty contrasty light coming from basically his profile. Lots of negative fill, a couple little things that we'll try and dress up in here. Let's try it. Probably the easiest way to get started is to grab the camera and figure out the framing first. Composition is probably one of the more tedious parts about creating these frames and kind of getting them set up. So worry about finding your frame first, figure out the lens that you're gonna shoot on, where the camera's gonna be placed, then start adding in set decoration and bringing in your lighting. Okay, definitely, probably a little bit too high of a perspective. I think we need to bring the camera down quite a bit. What gets me really excited, and also frankly Kylie, my wife, about doing stuff like this, practicing recreating these frames, is it gets your brain really thinking about how you can utilize elements in your own space, things you have around you. Something like this frame, Paul sitting up against this dresser here. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful frame, but if you really strip it back, this is pretty realistic for a lot of people to go out and try. We've got the dresser here, we've got some sort of, I don't know, looks like a painting, maybe covered up by a bed sheet, a cloth on top of the dresser. It looks like there's a lamp up on top there that's giving him a little bit of a hair light. And then the light source itself, we see a lot of contrast. It's almost like a total split key from the side where we have almost no light hitting the side of his face. There's like total shadow, maybe just a little bit of fill from the white over here. But the key looks like it's just out of frame left. It's pretty soft. It's a nice quality of light. I think we can definitely make this one happen. Yo, Hey, real quick, I need to tell you guys about the sponsor. They helped support and make this video possible, C Media Cloud from Sony. Okay, well, what is C Media Cloud, you might ask? Think of this as an all-in-one digital media management platform. The best part about this tool to me is it effectively combines like 3 software subscriptions I regularly use into one. Not only can we upload, store, and share our footage, but I can send and share that stuff with so much control, like built-in proxy creation. So if you're working with an editor or a client that doesn't need that giant file size, they can manually select a specific proxy resolution to download. Review links, have the ability to share a video with clients, only allow them to download specific versions. They can leave timestamps for feedback, even draw and mark up on the image to leave their notes visually for you to see. You can also easily trim videos inside of your workspace and be able to render them in custom formats, including the original source format. File transfers are incredibly fast and reliable with Aspera Connect. You don't have to worry about an upload or download potentially failing if you lost Wi-Fi for a moment. It'll pick back up right where it left off. Keeping everything in one place under one subscription not only is more effective financially, but is just less stressful to deal with and can help you to streamline your workflow in the long run. Look, it's free to get started, but the Pro plan starting at $15 a month gives you access to more data storage and more of those powerful tools. And if you need a team plan, they have that too, starting at $49 a month. The first 50 people to use my link and code down below get a free 2-month Pro subscription. Sony, I gotta say, I'm continually impressed with your commitment to providing incredible tools for us creators, and C Media Cloud is no exception. One of the only unfortunate downsides to the ZV-E10 is that it has the old FW50 battery, that like really small one, so it dies kind of quick. I'm using a USB-C and the good old Condor Blue D-Tap USB-C adapter. Talked about it in my last video, the best. So after scooting the dresser more into the center of the room to kind of get our frame roughly in place, I used these old curtains that we had laying around to just kind of drape it over the top of the dresser. For the frame over on the right side, just an extra one of the canvases that we used when I made this thing, I started by trying this Nanlite Pavo tube to see if the tube light would give us the right amount of light, but this wasn't quite soft enough. It definitely didn't match the quality of light in the original shot. It also needed a ton more contrast. Again, white walls, light spills everywhere, so I need to use a lot of negative fill to bring that shadow back in. I decided to just use the same setup as our last shot, the Nanlite Forza 60 with the spotlight and bouncing into the white side of this little small reflector. I realized that the little tiny LED panel that I put up in the vase wasn't quite giving the right quality of light that I wanted on the top of my head and shoulders, and so I brought the Nanlite tube back in to throw just a little bit more light and a little bit more in the direction that I needed it. And here's what we came up with. This one is definitely a little bit different. Main thing here, the color of the dresser and shirt. Mine is orange, and so I thought in my head, you know what, maybe I could just kind of key and mask my shirt and the dresser to be a bit more red to match the original shot. Well, looks a little weird, but definitely works. While I could totally go over the top, grading this, keying it and masking it to make all of the colors and lighting look exact, that's not really the goal here. What we're trying to do is just get our brains thinking and practicing, looking at a frame for reference and figuring out how we can practically apply those cinematography elements to our own shot. So this one, she's laying on the ground next to this bed, just over top, kind of out of the frame here. There's a window casting this very soft, just kind of cool blue, I don't know, kind of dusk or maybe morning light. Let's just lean into that and use what we have available here. So we'll use these sliding glass doors as our light source. And then because the edge of the bed is kind of right here, it looks like the light's coming at a bit of a diagonal. I think we'll actually just need to use the coffee table, kind of fake it like it's the bed, drape a blanket over it, and then we can kind of position it to get the light falling correctly across the frame. Simple enough, right? Kylie not only is my wife, but she is also a producer. She has an amazing eye for set decoration and art direction. And so even though we could keep this pretty simple and choose the most basic frames to practice, we just decided why not have a little bit of fun with it and kind of practice our art direction skills a little bit and actually find some of these set elements and props to really try and recreate some of these shots. We dug around at some thrift stores and found blankets that kind of matched everything. One little trick you'll see a lot of cinematographers doing is holding up their hand, and if you make a fist and kind of look at the side of it, there's little kind of pockets that can almost resemble a little bit of what a face might do. So as you rotate it, you can kind of see what begins to happen with the lighting. And this can begin to help you make a lighting decision quicker in a space without having to have somebody stand in or sit in. Let's come like diagonal.
So we do want like something thicker right here, so we still barely see the top of the wood and have it fall over the side.
So maybe we need to like almost like set another piece up on top of this that white blanket can rest on, and then we still see a little bit of the inside of this wood. Okay. Camera on. Definitely not me being kind of naive and being like, let's shoot it with natural light. Sun's going down, don't have enough light. So I think what we'll do is actually close that curtain and then use the Forza 60B with the spotlight and shine a perfect square to almost mimic a window source that will help cast that soft, cool light. Correct. Cool, can you just lay in for 2 seconds so I can just hold position for just a sec so I can finesse our light. It's important to remember that you don't have to overcomplicate this stuff. It can be as simple as just finding a portrait of somebody, maybe sitting on a park bench or in the grass. Every movie is going to have a medium or a close-up of somebody's face, and in a lot of ways, what makes a good filmmaker, a good cinematographer, or storyteller is your ability to capture somebody's face. Even though we ended up losing our light, the Forza 60B and the spotlight perfectly create a very believable window light here. I gotta say, I think this is probably our closest shot. It's almost 1-to-1. We were definitely a little shocked at how close this ended up looking. Our final frame is one from near the beginning of the movie. This character is way out on a beach somewhere. She drove up, parked, and is now sitting out in the sand, and it looks like the car headlights are just shining out at her. This one kind of stood out to me because it's beautiful, it's striking, but is also just very practical. Yes, it looks like these are car headlights, but we can kind of tell there's a lot of light going on in this frame. So I figured I would bring a couple of small lights. We're kind of in this little beach driveway, kind of in the Marina del Rey area, and I'm literally just gonna shine the car headlights. I mean, that's pretty much how this shot looks to begin with. So practical lighting. We're just gonna use the headlights, walk out there, try and get the ultra wide shot of her sitting on the beach, and then the medium wide. I turned on the high beams and had Kylie walk out. I had to crank up the ISO on the ZV-E10 quite a bit, 2000 or so. It's a little bit noisy. I definitely didn't get the lighting quite right here. It's definitely not perfect. In the original shot, the horizon line of the sand, like she's sitting like right on top of it, so the sand behind her seems to almost kind of drop off. But still, this is pretty close and definitely gives the same emotion, the same kind of feeling when you look at this shot versus the original. When we cut to the medium wide of her, you can tell the lighting is a little bit different, but again, perfect 1-to-1 is not really the goal here. This was a creative challenge to go out and get my brain turning as a cinematographer. How can I execute these lighting setups? How can I position this camera? What focal lengths am I going to shoot on? The ZV-E10, while literally being Sony's cheapest current mirrorless camera and only having 8-bit video, I don't know about you guys, but I am pretty impressed. Hopefully this inspires you guys to go out and try something like this for yourselves. I would love to see if you do. Send me a message on Instagram or send me an email. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.